Hey everybody, and welcome to another video thing on YouTube. I'm your host Dan. I think this show is going to be called Let's Talk About Comics. And today we're going to talk about the first of what I hope is 120 installments where we go through Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira. I have a Japanese edition of it right here of the Tankobon. It's not a first printing, but they're kind of all identical, and they haven't even changed the price in like 30 years. Here's the Dark Horse one. Looks pretty similar. And what is this book? This is Akira Club. This is a reissue of the book. And this collects a bunch of art that was created for Akira that is not in these they're not even really tankobons. They're kind of too big to be tankobons, but the six trade volumes, the most common version that you see this in. So let's talk a little bit about the publication history of Akira because it's relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish here, basically. So in the Akira Club art book, we see, art for various pieces of packaging, etc., etc. Some really cool color stuff that Otomo did. Um, some design sketches, some Young Magazine covers. And here's the real meat of this book. So, if you've only read these, there's about 120 pages from the original publication, serialized in Young Magazine, that you have not seen. Um, Roughly 120 pages. And then there's a few alternate pages and stuff. So we're going to be looking at these as they came out in Young Magazine in the sense of I'm going to look at the same number of pages as each chapter was, and we're going to start out each episode looking at the title page. I have a few Young Magazines. When one of those installments comes up, I'll bring it out and we'll take a look at it. Most of the time, I'm going to have to rely on this book. There's some very nice reproductions of these in here. The glossy stuff looks pretty similar to how it looks in the magazines, but a lot of the black and white title pages, the texture of the picture looks a lot different in here with the glossy paper than it does with the newsprint in the original magazine. So here's what's under the dust jacket of the well, here's a differently colored version of what's under the dust jacket of the Japanese paperback. Big crowded street scene. You're looking at like it's kind of funny. Some of this art now that I'm looking at it again, like there will be spoilers in this. Just I'll try to keep it to a minimum, but something bad happens. A few bad things happen. A lot of bad things happen in this book. And it feels like very post-apocalyptic at the end, but you look at this early artwork, it's not that far off from what you know what just a complete collapse of civilization would look like. And just the let's look at this for a second. Let's look at the covers to the different paperbacks, and maybe I'll do this for the episodes beginning each volume because the volumes do begin and end with at a specific chapter in the serialization. So yeah, you got this fish eating duck thing. I mean, maybe that has some cultural significance that I'm not picking up on, but just like on its own as an illustration, that could be a whole illustration. Like, he doesn't need to do this much, but he chooses to do this much. And it's just a panorama. You got bums sitting around a fire, you got couple kissing, you got a knife fight in the street, but this guy's off doing his own thing. And it just feels very fully realized. And I think like the greatest strength of Akira and why it has such staying power, a lot of it comes down to the settings, the backgrounds, and just how fully realized the environment the characters are moving through looks. And I could talk about this all day. You know, the car's beaten up, but it looks like it's been there for a while. It's not like an action shot. A lot to love. And so a few things were changed between the Young Magazine versions and the versions that most people are familiar with that would be in the Dark Horse or this or the 35th anniversary box set, which I have in the other room. That's where the Akira Club is from. We might take a look at that later. Anyway, so the original title pages for the very beginning of it look pretty different than what ends up in the final book. So here's the original from Young Magazine by way of the Akira Club book. And here's the first image that you see in the paperback. Very different. Chooses to go from a splash to a single page, or like a two-page splash to a single splash. It's all blue instead of the blue and red. There's much less detail and texture. And I think he made the right choice. I think this works better. We have the giant impact, the first one that destroys Tokyo. And sort of interesting that the sky, like so much of the story takes place at night, but a lot of the kind of like dome explosion, mushroom cloudy kind of stuff, it looks sort of like daylight out, like you have these blues and stuff. These are painted by Otomo, and it gives you kind of a sense, like a lot of these color pages, there's a few from Young Magazine that aren't reprinted in these, but they give you a sense of what would Otomo have done if he had, in fact, colored all of Akira, as opposed to having Steve Oliff do it for the first English edition, and we'll be looking at some of those for sure. So here's the next page in the paperback. And oh, okay. This only has that. So this must have the original first pages somewhere. I can dig around for that, but let's see. We got some more splash pages. It is in here somewhere, but basically, the entire opening color sequence was redrawn or repainted, shall I say, and it is in this book somewhere, and I am struggling. So, yeah, that's unpublished drawings. No, this is all... Okay, I'll find it. We'll look at it next time. Anyway, on with the show. So, yeah, so you got your big dome. Basically what this is saying in English is just 1991, I want to say. This came out in 82. There's big thing that looks kind of like a nuke that wipes out Tokyo. It's this dome-shaped thing. We're going to see a lot of that as we go through this series. Picture of the globe to kind of give a sense of scope and scale. I'm not 100% sure how this was done, if this is like kind of screwing around with a photograph or what it is. And we first see Kaneda and his biker gang, and we have this very dynamic shot here of the just this very curvy road. It looks kind of like some of the like highways that you use to get around like Houston, Texas. Not sure if the roads in Tokyo were actually built like that. I've never actually been to Tokyo, but anyway, you got like the sense that in a pretty short time, because this is 2019, they've rebuilt a very big city around this thing that got completely totaled in 1991. So on we go. They're riding the bikes. And what are they saying? The U.S. one. Actually, the colors look a lot different in the U.S. one than this one, right? Like, doesn't it? The U.S. one, the U.S. one's on top. Doesn't it look a lot darker than what's printed in this to you? Yeah, this first black and white page looks kind of identical. And anyway, Kanada's being a brash young man, and he's telling everybody to get moving on their motorcycles, basically. And yeah, here we have establishing shots. This series has by far the best establishing shots I've ever seen in comic books, period. And we see some like very beaten down architecture, but it's beaten down by time. I don't think this is like something that's left over after the explosion. Subway station, you got some guys in bike outfits. I think that's Canada in the crew. And they book it out of there because somebody shows up. They get into a high speed chase. And we have a few things already that were hugely influential on US comics. When these were being translated into English initially, Todd McFarlane was 110%. He was reading these. You see kind of like Otomo does a left to right kind of horizontal, like skinny panel more often. McFarlane kind of just like flips that over. Um, Liefeld does a lot of that. That becomes pretty common in US comics, like these long skinny panels, whereas if you look at like 60s and 70s Marvel and DC comics, nobody is doing that, even though it seems kind of intuitive. And it just gives you this sense of like an intense close up. And already Otomo is playing around with the camera angles and the different effects that he can get from the very subjective and malleable relationship that comics give us to time and physical space, right? Like we're technically we're in within like maybe 2 seconds of real time in theory on this one page, right? And we go from an extreme close up of a wheel, the bike's in motion at a medium shot, we're closing in on his face, and we move back to a long shot in the opposite direction so that we have this kind of visual device going from this bike to the face to the other bike, and then we have the speed lines leading us off the end of the page. And if you did that in a standard film, right, like if you did four kind of jarring cuts like that in 2 seconds of film, I don't feel like it would work. But in comics, like your brain and your eyes can kind of just slow it down to the pace where you get the dynamism without the headaches, and you can do stuff like that. You can stretch 2 seconds out to, uh, you know, quite a bit of page real estate. And so yeah, more bike chase stuff. It's a joy to read. We're not really. I don't feel like we're quite at the part where we see what the long term potential of this serial is. Although the art's already good, you know. I mean, Otomo did a lot of stuff before this. He's put in a lot of time drawing and writing manga, and he's you know, he knows what he's doing with all of the art supplies. He does get better as the book goes on, but he's starting from a pretty strong position. That's just, where do you find that photograph, right? If that was referenced from a photograph, but if it's not referenced from a photograph, like, how do you draw that? I don't know. And just like this excellent use of black textures, I feel like most comics are not going to take place entirely at night, especially like a black and white comic, because the night textures add a lot of work to get the details right. Like this stippling here must have taken forever. And yeah, and so let's go back a page. We have a relatively busy 2 pages, well, 4 pages really. Well, 6 pages. So yeah, so we have kind of quiet, loud, quiet, right? Like in rock records. You know, this is one big image. It's centered. Even though like what it's showing is supposed to be horrific, it's kind of a calming, centered image, and the size of it invites you to kind of sit and look at it longer and to kind of take a breath when you're reading. Same deal. These are, you know, the same real estate as a single page splash, just spread over two. Starts to speed up a little bit. Last kind of breath before frenetic action, and then boom, 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 you know, and everything's moving a lot faster. And the gang finds this giant crater where the old Olympic site used to be. You're looking at it. This kind of reminds me a little like some of the Jack Kirby stuff in 2001. And yeah, this looks a little what you would more like what you would see in a typical manga magazine or a typical seinen manga magazine. I think the way he of the time, obviously, the way he draws faces kind of changes a little bit as the series goes on, and I think he figures out how to rein in the expressions a lot better. Like, this is kind of a broad expression, and this too, like, it looks a little more cartoony than it would later. Kanada's got kind of like a baby face here, and we see Tetsuo, and Tetsuo is our. He becomes the antagonist. I don't think that's really given too much away. But right now, Kanada and Tetsuo are best friends, and they're speeding around in this highway, I think, near the abandoned Olympic site. And there's this weird looking little kid in the road, and this is where the action really starts. So there's a giant explosion. And Kanada's looking, and Yamagata is like, "Oh, Tetsuo, are you alright?" Because Tetsuo looks like he kind of bit a big one. This like bouncing motorcycle helmet is such a good little beat there, because it saves him a lot of drawing, but it almost feels like more intense than if you saw like the head hitting the pavement. And yeah, he's looking around. Excuse me. Kid disappears. Kind of is like, what the hell, bro? And The cops show up. And, so yeah, so cops show up. They phone it in and they tell Kaneda to get lost. He's like, "What about our friend?" Da da da. And so this is where the first chapter originally ends. So this is where we're going to stop today. There's going to be a lot more time to talk about the minutiae of this series. So this is, again, part 1 of 120. We're going to look at the title page and the contents of the second serialized installment that appeared in Young Magazine in January 1984 in our next episode. So hopefully you join me. And check out our store, Silver Factory Books and Records. We're in sunny, scenic Ballston Spa, New York. We got, if it's old media, we probably got it. And if you want to dork out about this kind of stuff, well, I'm practically the only person who works there. So I'm around. Anyway, hope you're all having a great day. And join me next time as we look at probably some Bob's Big Boy comics. Toodles.